Good evening. This is Business Today on ChannelEye. On this program, we talk about business and entrepreneurship in Sri Lanka. Keep tuning in to today's episode as well whilst we discuss business today. On today's episode, we have a discussion with the Principal of Tax and Regulatory of KPMG, and it's going to be an insightful discussion. So keep tuning in, and to know more about who this individual is, let's have a look at the 1920. She's an alumni of the International Visitor Leadership Program, the US Department of State's premier professional exchange program focusing on global economic cooperation, where she attended discussions, meetings on short-term visit to the United States in the year 2022. Rifka is also the secretary to the Association of Alternate Financial Institutions, and she is a KPMG nominee member of the International Chamber of Commerce. Rifka is also a member of the MBA Alumni Association. She's a lecturer in the subject of taxation and has addressed many public seminars in Sri Lanka covering various topics on taxation. She's a frequent contributor to newspapers on the subject of taxation. Prior to joining KPMG, Rifka has over 7 years' experience in finance and management in the mercantile sector. Good evening, ma'am, and welcome to the program.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, let's start off by speaking a bit about KPMG, a definition.
So KPMG is one of the big four audit firms, and we provide accountancy services. In addition to that, we provide advisory and tax services. So in Sri Lanka, we have a rich history of more than 125 years, and also is the oldest chartered accountancy firm in Sri Lanka. We provide, I think KPMG provides trainings and talent acquisition of more than, I think, 1,000 employees in Sri Lanka. So we do train a lot of employees in accountancy services, and while my focus is on tax, in general, KPMG is part of a global network of almost about 147 countries. And it is that presence that help us, that network that helps us to give the value addition to the clients as well.
Okay, and let's speak about your journey to becoming the principal at KPMG.
As far as my life in tax is concerned, it started off in 2011. But way before that, I think as far as my career started off, I studied at Musaeus College, and soon after that, I was doing my BCom degree at the Columbia University. While doing that, I also started off my professional qualification in SEMA. And as soon as I completed it, I did get my first job as an accountant at Brandix Textiles, and then thereafter I think it was a learning of accountancy, and then I thought need to diverse into different fields. So being an accountant, the fun factor comes when you get into different industries. So then what I did was I moved into another tea export company, which gave me more a different angle or different perspective to how businesses are run. And I started off with finance, but then I went into general management as well. And then thereafter, I think I was at my second company was Quality Ceylon Private Limited, which was the tea export company. And then I had a continuous thirst for knowledge to understand things which I normally like a new area of study. And that is where I thought I need to study tax because tax was not my forte. And then I thought it's best that I get into the tax field, because if I needed to move far ahead in the finance management field, I wanted tax also to be part of my repertoire of skills. So then in 2011, I joined KPMG, and at that time I was also doing my MBA, and I thought with my thirst for knowledge, let me join in and understand tax. So I started off at assistant manager tax in 2011, and it has been a gradual development in the career field in tax. So step by step I wanted to take the ladder, because I wanted to learn from the raw detail of tax. And I think that has molded me over the years. I was exposed to different tax challenges, tax questions, different angles, and because of my thirst to study, I was able to absorb a lot of things at a very short time, which I think helped me to go up the ladder as well. And I think more than anything, if you look at tax per se in Sri Lanka, it is a very complex environment for tax. So therefore itself, you could see that there was a lot of lack of knowledge in tax, and a lot of people were only sticking to the basics. So that is also one of the reasons why I wanted to, study further. So it was not only, if you see, not only the local taxes, I've done a lot of research into international taxation as well, and I have always tried my level best to enhance knowledge in different genres in tax.
Okay.
And that actually has helped me over the years. And yeah, it's been about 11 years of journey at KPMG to come to this principal position, and I think it has been a wholesome journey with a lot of knowledge sharing, a lot of mentors on the way, and I think a wonderful set of clients who entrusted me with all their issues and all their responsibilities on me, and a lot of colleagues past and present who has helped me in the process. And another aspect, I think, at KPMG, which I did not get in my previous organization, was the ability to work with a lot of people, train them, mold them, mentor them, and the fact that I have a passion for that, I understood when I joined KPMG. So that, in addition to tax, is something I have a passion for, which I also realized once I joined KPMG.
Right. And how does KPMG provide assistance to clients?
So as far as KPMG is concerned, we provide services in relation to audit, tax and advisory. And if all the focus is always to give value addition to the clients, help them with their business transformation. We totally understand that the environment we work in is very challenging. Everybody is looking at cost efficiency, trying to look at the most effective way of doing it. And that is what we also help our clients to do. Look at different angles, pre-plan for the future, and make sure that you have the holistic business models. So in addition to the audit assurance, we have a lot of other services. But in relation to tax itself, from my perspective, it is not about, we do provide compliance and advisory services, but we are now at the moment focusing mostly on helping clients to understand the fiscal changes, the policy changes, and to give them a perspective of how it's going to impact them in the long term, so that they can make the right decisions right now as to what needs to be done. But of course, within the legitimate framework, there are a lot of opportunities as well, although we always talk about taxes have increased and it is challenging. So the only main thing that we are at the moment, we always encourage our clients also to do, is always in advance do an impact assessment to see what are these changes, how is it impacting you, so that when at the board level, when you're deciding, making any strategies, you're making an informed decision. So impact assessment is something very common in the foreign countries, but less done by businesses in Sri Lanka. So that is something we are helping our clients also to do, and also do health checks, always double check whether you're in compliance, so that you wouldn't want any assessments or penalties out of the blue coming. So those are the kind of services, in addition to the general tax compliance services, that we are helping the clients on from recent times.
Okay, now coming to the topic of tax, what are your observations on the tax system in Sri Lanka?
All right, so that's a very broad question, but let me try to keep it as short as possible. So as far as the tax system is concerned, I think one key observation would be the fact that we have far too many taxes, and that itself leads to this confusion of not a lot of the common person not being knowledgeable in tax, because we have too many taxes and the law itself is a bit complex. And I think that is one of the key challenges also, because if a person understands the tax, understand when a payment has to be done, it would be far much more easier to get them to do voluntary compliance. But when the rules are complex, even the person who is paying the tax has their reservations because they are still trying to understand. So I think, and also if you see countries like Singapore, they basically have 2 or 3 taxes. They'll have the income tax, the GST, and the border tax, one customs duty. So maybe we also need to look at that at the moment. And also I think some struggle we have been going through over the years has been the fact that time to time we keep changing our policies. There's no policy consistency, and when we need revenue, we just either introduce a new tax or increase the rate of a current tax. and therefore the businesses or even as individuals we don't have time to plan anything because you have that uncertainty. So that also has been a feature, a negative feature in the system, I would say. But of course we have a long history. I mean, as far as tax is concerned, Sri Lanka's initial inland revenue ordinance goes up to 1932. So our history has been very rich. As far as even VAT is concerned, I think we are one of the countries who has the most experience in. So, but one thing that we have been doing as over the time is we've always been reacting to changes but not been proactive. So which is why, if you see, when I say there's far too many taxes, that is the reason. We have been reactive to certain things we've been just introducing, and we've not had a proper policy in line as to why we are introducing certain things. So even right now, as we stand right now, we do not have a long-term perspective as to where we should be maybe 3 or 4 years down the line.
Right.
For an example, if you take Singapore, I saw that they have already told what their GST rate would be for 2024. They have declared it already. And how much it helps businesses. I mean, businesses can plan today for tomorrow, isn't it?
Yeah.
So that is also something lacking. And I think we've been trying to do broad basing as much as possible, get a lot of people into the network is something we've been trying to do. But time to time, maybe because of the complications of trying to get all the information, it has not been done properly. But a feature that we should try to get is to broad base, get everybody into the network, but also have equity in taxation, let the broad shoulders bear the higher taxes. Because if you see in Sri Lanka, another feature is the fact that our indirect tax collection is 80% of the total tax revenue, and the income tax collection is only 20%. So when you say 80% is from indirect tax, that means something like VAT is a regressive tax. So although uniformly the tax is applicable to everyone, you would have a low income earner paying a large chunk of the tax, which is why it's called regressive, and which is why it is not something that is good for a tax system. We need to increase the direct tax maybe up to about 40 and then reduce the indirect tax collection. So those are, I think, my observations and some things we need to look at for the future.
Okay, and let's speak a bit about the tax system reformation.
Okay, so reforms, I think one thing that we need to look at is, again, as far as policy is concerned, there are two angles in a tax system. One is the policy making and one is the tax administration.
Right.
So as far as policy making is concerned, like I said earlier, we need to have a long-term perspective. So we need to have a team in place who's going to decide that. Because while we are having this discussion, there should be a team who's thinking about what is our plan for 5 years down the line. How are we going to collect our taxes? So there has to be a policy team in place, which I think we've not been able to successfully do. Because tax again is a research area, it's an academic study, so you need people with that knowledge, with economic knowledge, all to come together to make sure that they are making a proper strategy which is also certain. The certainty aspect is something lacking, and when we are looking at inviting foreign direct investment into the country, the foreigners keep asking, okay, what about certainty? So that is the angle that we need to also look at, have long-term strategies, have certainty, and also have transparency. What happens, how much is the collection, what happens with that money? Because at the end of the day, one of the key reforms we should always, our final outcome should be to encourage voluntary compliance. Because you cannot always put rules and regulations and get people to pay. Everybody should feel patriotic to pay the tax. And how would you do that? I mean, for you to do that, simplicity in the tax law is one thing. Every person should feel everybody is paying their fair share of tax. So because of that, I also should pay.
Right.
And that feeling should come because of the strategy. So once we do that, the flow of money into the state coffers will be an automated process, because everybody would be willing to pay their fair tax. And in addition to that, so as far as policy making, I think in the budget it was said about a presidential commission for taxation. So maybe I'm looking forward to seeing that being formed, because that is something that is I think very strategic and very important for the reform of the tax system. And in addition to that, as far as tax administration is concerned, I think there's a lot of work to be done in relation to collection. Because if you see, even in recent times, there were a lot of tax write-offs. At a time when we are trying to collect revenue, why would you go and write off taxes? So that means we have not been efficient in our collection. So I think that mechanism of collection needs to be efficient, and also technology. I think we have been embracing the Revenue Administration Management Information System, popularly called as the RAMIS, for tax collections and tax record keeping for some time. But I also feel that there is a lot of development that needs to be done, because usage of technology as far as tax is concerned in other countries is much more advanced. For an example, in different countries like Philippines, Vietnam, even the VAT invoices are real time. So when a VAT invoice is issued, it's on the system. The Inland Revenue Department has visibility to see what invoices are being issued. But right now in Sri Lanka, we are still it was a manual process. Each company does their all VAT invoices. Now we need to look at our second aspect of how to reduce fraud. So then these kind of aspects also has to be brought into the system, real-time system, online e-invoicing. So those angles also need to be looked at. Also, RAMIS also has to be now, advanced mechanisms have to be done, because at the moment we are filing our returns, but certain times there are still lapses in the system. So technology has to be inbuilt a bit more than what it already is, but good aspect of it is we have already taken the start.
Right.
So now we are in the right direction. It's just that we need to improve further. And another angle, I think, as far as tax reform is concerned, is again the broad basing. Simplify the taxes, reduce the number of taxes, get everybody into the network of the tax, so that everybody feels that they are paying their fair share. And also keep one of the key features of tax is also to have convenience. It has to be collected at the time that the money is available to be paid. So in that sense, I think if you see now recently they have again introduced the deduction at source, where APIT and AIT, at the time of paying the employment income or at the time of making a payment, they deduct the tax. So that is a good thing that they have introduced, although the rates a lot of people are not happy about. Still, it's a good mechanism, because while it's convenience, because once the money comes to the hand, and if you have a self payment later on, at that time sometimes the cash flow might not be there. So things like that, basic features of a good tax system, we should try to embrace, because our ultimate aim should be voluntary compliance, and a person feels the tax money that I'm paying is there is representation, and there's transparency into what is being done.
Right.
And that is something I think our ultimate reform has to be to get to that position.
Okay. Now, tell us about your work in structuring new foreign business ventures in Sri Lanka.
Yeah, so as far as foreign business ventures is concerned, one of the key things is the fact that they would want to understand how the tax system is and how it impacts their business. So how we help out is one of the things, of course, like I said earlier, we do have a complex tax system, to make them understand of what are the fiscal changes and how it impacts their businesses, and also to make them understand what is the best way of setting up their businesses in Sri Lanka, because some would prefer to have just a branch office, some would prefer to have a proper subsidiary, and there are different ways of having. Sometimes it could be virtual offices. So there's a lot of forms of having business. So what we try to do is we try to work with them, help them out. What are their ultimate aim in Sri Lanka? What do they want to do? Have manufacturing plants? We look at everything. What do they want? And based on that, we provide them advice on to how best to set it up, how best within the legal framework, how best can you have a tax efficient framework, and also to help them out in relation to clarifications. Sometimes the tax law may not be that clear, and they may need advance notification as to how the tax would be. So then we do have conversations with the Inland Revenue Department to give them that comfort, okay, this is how it will be taxed, so that they have the certainty. Because if you see a lot of the foreign business ventures always look at the certainty, because they do plan in advance for anything that they do. So that is the factor that we try to bring into them, to give them tax advice, informing business, and where they can continue to do business in a successful way in Sri Lanka.
Okay, and what would you say is your advice to businesses facing challenges in the tax environment?
Right, so I think if you see in Sri Lanka right now, we do have a high tax regime. And this is not only in Sri Lanka, I think a lot of other countries also do have high taxes because of the economic recession that's going on. One key thing is always, I think businesses fail to do, is keep a tab of these changes and be proactive as to what needs to be done. So one key thing is, even though taxes have increased, there's still opportunities within the tax legal framework. There are still exemptions that are available, but you need to be knowledgeable about it, and even concessions that are available. So one key thing I would say to businesses is identify early what are the tax, get a knowledge in that. What are the tax changes, what are the concessions already there, and also keep a tab of your compliance, because sometimes what happens is we don't take compliance seriously, and when a letter comes from the Inland Revenue Department only, you're like, oh, there's a letter. No, I mean compliance is something should be part and parcel of your business routine. So keep a tab of the deadlines, because now with the RAMI system a lot of thing has been online, and get used to that system, and also keep a tab of those documents. What has been filed, what notifications, what information has been given, because when the Inland Revenue Department requests for audits or inquiries, if everything is in one place and you know you have access to that information, and if you can provide that information in an efficient manner, you can close that matter with the Inland Revenue Department rather than, because what I have seen in my experience is a lot of information requests maybe from the Inland Revenue Department also is delayed, but from the client perspective also they have to find the information and it is not there, and therefore again there are delays, and then it becomes a not so easy relationship between the two. So I think in a challenging environment we have to get the basics right. So I think that's what I would tell businesses to do, and also be mindful about what changes could happen. So economic changes, what different, because planning cash flows is very important. So you need to plan ahead. So certain tax structuring that you might do, you might structure your company with the intention of getting tax benefits. So if you are doing those things, you need to get a holistic picture. So you need to plan ahead. What is my plan? Where do I want to be in 2-3 years time? With that plan, you need to sit, decide. But there are certain opportunities within the legal framework. There are still opportunities that one can make use of, but you need to be knowledgeable to do so.
All right. Well, thank you so much for the valuable advice related to tax in Sri Lanka. That was Rifka Ziyard, the Principal Tax and Regulatory of KPMG. Thank you for being with us this evening.
Thank you very much for having me.
And that winds up today's episode of Business Today. Do join us next time as well. Till then, have a good night.